Hello everyone. I think it's actually time to start the last panel. And I think you don't want to miss this one, because this one I think is actually going to be the most interesting of them all. This is where we meet the private sector, and they are actually the ones that we want to engage much more in greening the UN peacekeeping operations. So please have a seat, and I'll invite the speakers up here. Thomas, Mats och Anders, who is with us on video link. So the objective of this panel is to learn from the private sector as they openly discuss their experiences working with the UN peacekeeping operations. And my name is Johanna Brismar-Skoog, and I will be moderating the session. I am the Director of Government Affairs for Business Sweden, but I have a background in diplomacy. I'm a Swedish career diplomat, having served in Brazil and Indonesia. And I do also have a long experience in working with UN issues for 1.5 decades or something like that. I don't want to go into years, but yeah. So I have some credentials in being here. And we all know the importance of bringing in the private sector when we talk about the green transition. It's the private sector that is driving change, and they are the private sector that's developing the innovative solutions that can actually bring the transition, both to the UN, but also to the rest of the world. We see that. We see that in all over, that they have the technologies, they have the innovations, they have the cost solutions to do this, and they have the drive. And they're better for the climate and for environment, while at the same time often cheaper and smarter in the solutions. And I'm very proud to say in this setting, among friends, that the Nordic countries have been particularly good at this. We're very proud to have that from all of us here. And despite this, there are complaints from the UN, as we heard today, and I call it complaints because that's basically, I think, what we heard, that we're not, the companies are not responding to the UN's requests. And we will hear, and we have heard also that from the business side, the UN can be very cumbersome, very problematic, and very time-consuming to get into. So where is the problem, where is the truth, and how do we bridge this gap? We talked about risks, we talked about political risks, and we talked about security risks, and we know that peacekeeping operations can be particularly challenging for greening. You see the numbers also. Was it 6% of energy that was renewable in peacekeeping operations? So I'm very happy to have with us today 3 Nordic companies, one each from Norway, Denmark, and Finland. 2 of them have been successfully worked with the UN in peacekeeping operations, and the 3rd one is very eager to get into that world. They represent both renewable energy and ICT, have varying backgrounds and varying trajectories with the UN. So let me welcome Anders online. I will let you start your presentation, but then we will have Mats from Kube Energy, who we heard a lot about today, and Thomas from Reaktor, a Finnish company. Thank you. Over to you, Anders, if you're still online with us. I hope Anders is online with us. Oh, there you are. Perfect. Great.
I am. Thank you very much, Johanna. Let me just try and see if I can share my presentation here. Just 1 second. Perfect. Can everyone see it clearly? All right, then we'll begin. Let me know if the sound is not good enough.
Swap what? The sound is good, but you need to change the view because we have double view.
You have double view?
We have two views of the presentation and one view of you.
Okay.
So more presentation, well, one presentation and one view is fine, or just one presentation?
That's a good question. That was not there when we checked it before. How about now? Is that better?
No, same.
Same?
Yeah, perfect. Great. Go with it.
All right, perfect. So thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning here from Copenhagen. Just to give you a short introduction on Just Graham Hansen, JGH Group, and the business we do within renewables, in particular solar. So jumping into it, JGH was established in Denmark in 1959. We have a long history, and basically since the 1990s, we've been a supplier to the United Nations system, where we have had an increased focus on development and peacekeeping, supporting the UN peacekeeping missions and other UN entities worldwide. In 2004, we won and implemented our first contract for solar solutions for Honduras, and that marked the beginning of what we call today JGH Solar, which is our division for renewable energies with a particular focus on PV solar solutions. Our headquarters is here in Copenhagen, Denmark, where we are around 30 full-time employees. Around 20 of those are involved in the renewable department, both on the commercial side and on the operational side of things. As mentioned, we have been a supplier to the UN since the 1990s. And for the UN PD and the peacekeeping missions, we have supplied a lot of different materials, vehicles, and services under the PD system contracts for more than 15 years. Most characteristically, it is our company who has been supplying the characteristic blue ballistic vests and also in the past the helmets as well. When it comes to renewable energy, we hold long-term agreements, which are similar to the PD system contracts, with other UN agencies, such as the UNDP, who has been implementing renewable projects for more than 10 years, UNICEF, UNHCR, and World Food Programme. We have full in-house capacity within our company for full turnkey engineering services. So that basically covers everything from the design phase, site visits, going to have a look at the different sites, analyzing loads, designing the system to fully be able to cater for the need of the client, choosing the right manufacturers, the right brands and quality for the solution, all the way to the installation, commissioning, where we normally go on site, and covering the operations and maintenance periods as well in the countries in which we work. We have been ISO certified since 2007, and we have recently added also the 14001 and the 45001 to our portfolio. And in general, we apply to the UN Global Code of Conduct as well, and the Global Compact, and we try to follow the UN Code of Conduct with all our partners, both on the supply side and on the installation side of our projects. So with the focus on renewable energy, a little bit about what we offer. So basically, we divide the type of offerings to our clients into two different types of contracts. One is engineering, procurement, and construction, known as EPC. Basically here you provide a deliverable, a good, which is in this case is a complete PV solar system that can be any size, that can include battery systems, that can include, it could be a hybrid system that has to work with an existing generator. So basically the deliverable is a turnkey installed system at a determined site. Here the ownership structure is on the purchaser. So basically once the plant is built and commissioned, you hand it over to the client, the purchaser, who will then be responsible for the daily operation of the system. There are potentially operations and maintenance agreements in place for a certain amount of years to ensure that the purchaser takes on the project in a good way. So the pros of this kind of setup is that you get the best long-term value for money. You have a faster implementation time because typically you don't have to establish local companies within the country where you have to sell electricity like for the PPA. So typically turnaround time for an EPC project could be 6 to 12 months, typically depending on the size and complexity of the plant. Of course, the purchaser gets the ownership of the assets, also meaning that it's a mobile solution that the purchaser will be fully entitled to relocate the assets to potentially another country or another site if need arises. The cons is that, of course, some technical capacity is required. We've heard a lot of the speakers talk about this as well, that basically the UN in this case will be responsible for producing energy themselves and for keeping an eye on the operation, the daily operation and maintenance of the systems. It is a higher short-term investment because you are going out and you are financing the actual physical plant that you are buying under this EPC contract. And there is a certain amount of technical responsibility. So the benefits in this case for the UN would be that they're actually buying a system. The value for money is higher than under a PPA structure typically, and that they own the assets, meaning that they could potentially relocate them if they're containerized to other sites, other missions, other countries. And if in comparison we look at the power purchase agreements, the PPAs, here the deliverable is actually the produced electricity, the output, and it is typically the supplier or the PPA holder that owns the physical plant. So the pros of that is that the initial investment is of course lower. You have to take less money out of your pocket to begin with. The purchaser pays only for the generated electricity, meaning that the supplier is responsible for the output that the system produces. And there is a limited technical responsibility because the supplier is typically responsible for the full operation and will have a technician on site to ensure that the system is operating at full capacity. And if you look at the cons for this type is that it's very long-term contracts, long-term commitments. Typical commercial PPA agreements are typically between 10 and 15 years, which we know is a challenge sometime with the UN system to have these kind of long-term commitments beyond 3 to 5 years. In general, you'll have longer implementation times of the project. We heard a little bit about it for the Somalia project. Mostly likely due to you have to secure land, you have to establish local enterprises where you have to seek permissions and permits to sell the electricity locally in the country. So there will be higher establishing costs, and it will take longer time to establish this setup. And then again, you'll also have the lack of flexibility for relocation of assets in case it is needed. Our personal experiences here, we have been involved in the Mali project, pilot project that was briefly mentioned, I think, by Atul before UNPD. We were the EPC for that part with the private partner, and we are aware of the unfortunate situation where the mission had to close down and is currently closing down. So this is one of the challenges that we see as one of the greatest for the peacekeeping mission when it comes to these kind of PPA agreements, because They are there on a political mandate, which is subject to change, which can leave the private companies and the private partner in an unfortunate situation in this case. But these are the two different models that we typically look at and that we can offer the PPA through our strategic partner. And looking at a few of the solutions, we have mini grids. So mini grids is typically self-contained and basically a small power plant designed to bring electricity to off-grid or underserved communities. This could also be to a complete compound in the example of the peacekeeping missions. So basically by having distribution lines and a complete distribution setup together with grid smart management, you have an independent power plant that can supply your facility. And basically they can come in any sizes from very small mini grids for where the loads are not that high to quite large in the megawatt scale. Hybrid systems were also mentioned before. This is where you have a smart integration of, in this case, solar energy together with an alternate power source. Typically, we see that as diesel generators. It could also be wind turbines. So you have a system in place that automatically changes between the power sources when the need arises. Typically, you will also have battery power banks here that saves the power, the excess power that you produce during peak hours, and then you can use them during periods with less sunshine. So, for example, during night and so on. This is a very popular solution, especially for remote areas that are dependent on diesel generators. So that will be a good addition to the energy production of that particular system. And again, here the sizes can be anywhere from smaller systems, 100 kV, to up to a 5 mega, 10 megawatt plants. Third one is battery energy storage, BESS, which is something that is developing quite fast in the market. The technical solutions are getting better and better. The quality of batteries are getting better and the lifetime as well. And it is also something that is moving very much towards mobile solutions, complete containerized solutions that can be moved around. And it's a very good addition to any kind of power production where you have excess energy. So you can actually store that and you can use that for periods where the renewable energy plant is not producing energy, so that you try to cover your energy need as good as possible with the renewable energy. And for UN, this is a solution that makes a lot of sense. We're already supplying it to a lot of other UN clients, as it comes 100% containerized, and it's of course an ideal mobile solution that can be moved around according to the need. And again, here we can do that in different sizes, as it comes in standard shipping containers, 20 foot or 40 foot. Some recent project examples here. We completed 640 smaller PV systems for Zimbabwe under Solar for Health program with the UNDP. So basically small systems ranging from 5 kV up to 40 kV for small clinics and hospitals throughout the whole country. We've just commissioned our first floating PV system in Tuvalu, also under the UNDP framework, on a small pond. That's the picture you see to the left, the green picture, it's 100 kV on floating structures, the first of its kind, also a pilot project for that region. So we're very excited about that. Another project that we're very excited about, we just commissioned 2 plants in Central African Republic, project financed by the World Bank, and 2 very challenging areas of Bambari and Babarati, where the UN peacekeeping missions are also present. Very challenging projects. In the end, we managed to get them connected to the local grid, and we're now in the commissioning and handover phase. 250 kV system, hybrid system with battery energy storage for Suriname, financed by the Inter-American Development Bank. We did a likewise same size, 250 kV with battery storage for Mali, for the UN's own offices there. This was a carport installation, and this has been supplied this year as well. And we are currently in the installation phase of 7 villages for Southeast Sulawesi in Indonesia, where we are installing combined around 500 kV solar together with 2 megawatt hours of batteries on very remote seaside villages in Indonesia. Some of them are on raised platforms in the sea, where you build customized structures to really accommodate it. So this is really the type of projects under development where you are providing energy to those who don't have any energy today. We have completed installations in 4 continents, installed more than 20 megawatts of PV capacity, combined with 40 megawatts of battery. Some pictures from some of the plants, anything ranging from 5 kV small systems, solar home systems, up until 2 megawatt small power plants, grid connected, off grid, ground mount, roof mount, carport structure, floating. Basically, we undertake everything here. And just to sum up this presentation, basically I understand that also part of the reason behind this seminar is to attract new companies also to the UN, and for us to share our experiences. We have been working with the UN for a very long time, and I want to say that 4 companies wanting to do business with United Nations. From our side, it's perseverance and dedication. I think the tools are there in place to start looking at it, and it's just about starting. You don't need 60 years of experience as we do. So that's all we have from our side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anders. That was very interesting. Over now to Mats Hansen from Kube, which we actually heard about during the presentations earlier today. So please, Mats.
Thank you so much. And I had prepared a presentation about the company and the project that we have in Baidoa in Somalia that we've heard a bit about today. But in the interest of maybe keeping the session a bit more dynamic, I thought I'd go through that a bit more quickly and then rather say something about our experience with the sort of the procurement around the UN, and using this chance of having the procurement section here and companies to provide some advice and some thoughts from our side. So Kube Energy, we are a small Norwegian renewable energy company. We build renewable power plants in fragile and conflict affected areas. So these are areas where there's very little infrastructure for electricity today, and where most local populations and where big organizations like the UN depend on operating diesel generators to power their own operations or to power homes or businesses around the cities. So the problem with this is that while the diesel generators are quite easy to install and cheap to buy, they are hard to maintain, and buying fuel means that the cost of electricity in the long term is very high. Kube, by contrast, we build renewable power plants where we have a high upfront cost of the power plant, but then over the long run we're able to sell electricity relatively cheaply, and sort of our business model it is quite different from the established practices in these locations today. So for us, ideally developing a project or bringing a power plant from initial idea to close will take around 2 years, where the first year of that, it's sort of initiating contact with local governments and really anchoring these projects into local development plans, and dealing with licensing issues and regulations. It's about securing land, either from the government or from private owners of that land, and dealing with compensation, for example, if there are anyone on that land already. It's about securing the financing, so we use private equity financing for the projects, so dealing with investors, financing mechanisms, and issuance or guarantors for the investments like MIGA or the World Bank Group, which are sort of central to bringing down the commercial risks of these projects. And then we deal with the off-takers or the customers of the potential projects. So that's either local companies or the UN. So understanding what their energy requirements are now and what they will be sort of in the future, so that we can plan out the project. The actual installation of these type of projects is actually very short. It takes around 2 to 4 months to put the plant in place. So the development of the project is mainly bringing sort of all of those initial processes together. And the UN can play a very central role in that. The UN is, as we've heard, a very large consumer of electricity. So in Baidoa, for example, the UN consumes around 30 to 40% of the total electricity generated in Baidoa. They are a very credit-worthy entity, so they're an entity that we can bring to investors and say, you know, they're among our customers. It's a high likelihood that will be paid. They can bring down the currency risk of operations because they can pay in US dollars. And so, for example, in Central African Republic, that brings down the currency risk for the project considerably. But they're also an entity that sort of brings a sense of legitimacy to the projects. And when we are in, sometimes in delicate sort of, we have delicate relationships with local governments, having the UN as an interested stakeholder in these projects make it harder for local governments then to ask us for anything that is not above board. So they bring a sort of they have many important functions in these projects. So I think for us, it's a central part of getting these projects to close. Very briefly about the project in Baidoa, also because we've had questions about that earlier today. It's a 3 megawatt power plant with a 5 megawatt hour battery bank and some diesel capacity. So the renewable penetration of that plant is around 90%, where the diesel generators will provide the remaining part of that electricity. The plant will be connected to the UN in Baidoa and the peacekeeping forces, and it will also have a connection to the local community. Initially, the main hospital in Baidoa, the government offices, and a few other entities operating within what's called the green zone in Baidoa. But we also have dialogues going with the government on how to bring the connection further into the city of Baidoa. When it comes to how to, well, I mean, this is a procurement seminar on energy and ICT solutions to the UN. And I feel that there's been a lot of, I mean, the UN has certainly expressed a lot of, I think they're very ambitious with their goals. I think that when we've gotten feedback from the procurement section, it's very often a focus around how to deal with their sort of publicized procurement opportunities that they publish online. I think from from our experience, we believe that a lot of the energy or the transition will happen with projects that are initiated outside the UN, where the UN can play a role as an anchor client, and I think they have embraced that role through the Energy Compact that they're a part of, and where the UN plays a role as a customer of a larger plant, and where these procurement opportunities are not generated within the UN and they will not be published on their site, but rather where companies will have to go out and generate or start the development through the local interaction with local governments and sort of start the development independently and secure, at least in our case, it's been vital to secure the interest of the senior management of UN operations in the field and let them deal with sort of the procurement sections and figuring out how to go forward. I think, and looking at UN operations globally, I think that's a structural project that makes a lot of sense. I'm sure there will also be a lot of procurement opportunities generated through the UN site, but I think that there will be separate models, and depending on what kind of company you are, that's pursuing opportunities with the UN. It will, you can either generate things yourself, or you can respond to options that are posted online. I think if I have any recommendations to the UN sort of procurement divisions, I don't know if they have any representatives here, but I think that to a large degree there needs to be some recognition that there will be these independent projects that will be presented to the UN, and I think to a certain extent that there needs to be some guidelines provided to missions around the world on how to deal with those type of projects. And I feel to a certain extent that procurement officers are left a bit unsure of how to move forward with that. So I think that would be my recommendation. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah. Great, and then lastly, Thomas from Reaktor. You are not currently doing business with the UN, but you're representing a company that is eager to do so. Please tell us a little bit about yourselves.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess I'm bringing more of a kind of an outside-in view on this, as kind of we're a global software consultancy. So the theme of the day is renewable energy and ICT in US peace operations. So I'm the and ICT, and also maybe the peace operations, as one of our sectors that we work on is public safety and defense. And to be more precise, we work with situational awareness products. So which is very, very kind of it's a big thing in kind of operating on the field. It's kind of like what I'm hearing now, and kind of we do a lot of work with governments around the world, but not with the UN. And I think it was interesting that the panelists before were talking about the difficulty of finding vendors, and there's kind of it sounds like there's kind of this supply and demand mismatch somehow. I can promise you that there's a lot of us vendors desperately wanting to provide services to the UN, and then there's the UN desperately searching for vendors. So I guess, but it does take two to tango, and it's kind of like and kind of also the heavy processes and even mazes that you have to navigate through were mentioned. So kind of like I think that like we just have to find each other. Yeah, and I also picked from Camilla that access to technical expertise is very much kind of sought after, and it's interesting kind of coming from like a person who kind of is the provider of technical expertise, and kind of it's like that. I think that pretty much proves the point. It's from also kind of like we're roughly 800 people globally. Our HQ is in Helsinki, Finland, and we also operate here in North America. We have offices in Amsterdam, Lisbon, Tokyo, so kind of we have a global reach. But it's kind of I'd say that it's like and we have found ways to collaborate with governmental operators before, but it's also from a private sector view, it's always kind of, and it's like, it's a huge investment. And when you're trying to run a business, you think of like, is it worth it, or should I go to somewhere else where kind of the same revenue is more easily available? But then again, I think that what UN has is that UN, like people nowadays, and I'm talking about now the software engineering kind of industry. So if you're a software engineer, you can pretty much choose where you work and who you work for. And I guess the thing that UN has is that UN carries high impact projects, which are kind of like where people can choose who they work for. I think that kind of you folks are in the very kind of a premium position of kind of, because you're working with things that actually matter. And then kind of like that's I think, so it's about kind of how to find the right talent maybe, and here we are. So but that's as a kind of outside in view.
Thank you very much. Very interesting, I think, for us here too. So listening to the presentations and having talked to you before a bit too, I noticed that both you, Mats, and you, Anders, have previous experience from dealing with the UN. You've either been employed in or working with the UN, or you have procurement experience, as in the case of you, Anders, and JGH. How important do you think that is to actually be successful in getting through the system and understanding the system and knowing which strings to pull and which levers to push?
Can I start?
Yeah, I let you, Mats, answer first, and then...
I think it's been important for several different reasons. So I think primarily it allows us to understand one of our main customers for our power plants. So having worked with the UN, knowing how the system works, it kind of gives us a bit of predictability about how future operations will be. And I think that's one of the sort of the key elements that we need to present convincingly when we speak to investors. That we have some understanding for what the risks or how things will develop over, these projects have a lifetime of, a contracted lifetime of 15 years, but will have a lifetime of 30 years plus with how they're designed, the plants are designed. So I think that's important. I think secondly for us, it's been having some level of contacts in the UN has been important. We have depended on support from senior management in the missions to succeed with our projects. And quite honestly, it would be very difficult to do that, I think, if you don't have some network and some people that you can draw on. I think these are it's isolated from procurement actions. So not to say that you need contacts with the UN to get contracts, but it's certainly very helpful to build sympathy for projects that may be a new modality than the UN has been working on previously. And I think it has given us a sense of, like a very practical sense of where the UN operations are, and we know where to look for the right information. So it's been, very important, I think, for us.
Great. Thank you. Anders, what do you say?
Yes, thank you, Johanna. I think, again, our entrance into solar is a bit different from Mark and Kube, and you have to look at it as different setups, because a PPA agreement like the one I hear that Kube has in Somalia is very different. The setup is very different, right? So when we do solar with UNDP or UNICEF, World Food Program, or UNHCR, it is a lot about understanding public procurement, because these are according to public procurement rules. You have to deal with Incoterms, you have to understand Incoterms, you have to understand the risks and involved in especially some of these countries in which we're operating, and you have to be able to mitigate that risk in your offer. And at the same time, there is competition, so you have to be competitive on the price. Whereas the project development side, where you create a project from scratch, it talks a little bit about this value for money. That when you look at the two different solutions, it is a different one. So I would say it depends on what your angle is to getting into working with the UN, what kind of model you're offering. But if you are offering any other kind of model than PPA, then good knowledge of public procurement is definitely something that's very important.
Thanks. Many of the Nordic companies that we deal with are quite small. They have solutions that might be very good for the UN, both in the field, humanitarian and development situations, but also in peacekeeping operations. What would be your advice? And I'm also looking for your advice to Thomas and Reaktor. how to approach the UN. What do they need to think about? Many times we see that these companies might be small, may not be very internationalized, but do have solutions that would be game-changing. I'll let you start this time, Anders, I think.
Yes, thank you. I think for the first part, it is also to understand that the UN is not one entity. It's a lot of different entities, and I think there was some talk about cross-agency cooperation before, which I think all can agree that that is not the biggest force of the different UN agencies. So, for example, the long-term agreements, each of the UN agencies will try to establish their own. That goes for ICTS as well. So really first understanding, okay, what are the UN entities that actually procure these kind of goods? How do they do their public procurement, and then analyzing the market size? That would be my best advice. So you actually target your effort of where you're trying to enter into the market.
Mats?
I think when it comes to companies that have developed a new product, for example, or a new solution for an existing product, I think, again, the UN procurement platform, it's not a very suited platform for that, because that assumes that the UN already knows what kind of product it wants to buy. And you know, maybe I'm not, our products are not very, or our technical solutions are not very innovative. So we didn't really have to go through that. I think the service model that we provide is quite innovative, but our technical solutions are quite conventional. But my advice would perhaps be to try to anchor that quite up in senior management, and see if they can impact on their organizations to investigate or explore sort of that new technical solution that is being provided. So try to build some champions within the system, because if the UN doesn't know that solution exists, it will not appear on their procurement platform.
No. Yes, very true. Thomas, what is your reaction to this? How do you feel?
What I'm hearing is that it kind of, if you see it in the procurement portal, it's too late already. So there should be dialogue before that, and kind of that's which goes very much with all kind of public procurement. So especially when you're trying kind of like, we're not pushing a product, we're pushing a solution. So kind of so we have to be fishing more upstream than the portal.
Thank you. Question from the audience? None? One.
I have a motto from Arnik. I have a general question. It has popped up a few times, and I think it's quite important both for the UN and the private sector about the security of the investment if you go into the partnership projects. One part that has been spelled out a few times is, of course, the duration of the contracts, but the second part is what kind of a security and the guarantee can UN give to the private sector, and vice versa. How does the private sector deal with such challenge from the cost perspective, risk mitigation, etc.?
Mats?
Yeah, so I think Mark mentioned this also in the previous panel, which with regards to sort of the knowing what the UN can commit to and what they can't. In our experience, there has been some level of commitment for the UN for our projects for a initial period of 5 years, and then a sort of an additional 5-year rollover. There are some provisions in the contracts with that sort of guarantees the right to terminate if funding for projects are sort of dissipates. So I think from our side, there are two ways that we mitigate against that risk. I think one side is to sort of, through our awareness of the UN and sort of our analysis of how the footprint of the UN in various locations will vary according to different scenarios, if they're starting to draw down troops, for example, or if there will be an increased effort on development. And I think the second for us is the connection with the local community. I think beyond sort of that being a part of our ambition of establishing these power plants, it's also commercially it makes sense. Baidoa, for example, it's difficult to predict exactly the population. It depends a bit on whether or not you count the displaced or not. But I think the estimate is around 500,000 people. They're currently buying electricity at 90 cents per kilowatt hour. We believe that there's an inherent demand for electricity there that will only increase in the future. And from a commercial perspective, we think there's a good case to be made if the UN would draw down its presence in Baidoa in 5 years, that we could quite considerably increase the supply of electricity to the local community. So that's our thinking around mitigating for the risk of potentially losing the UN as the main client.
Anders, do you have any comments on this?
I'm afraid I could not hear the question.
Oh, sorry. No, of course. The question was about risk mitigation, both from the investor side and from the countryside, and in general. Yeah.
I mean, the example is given.
I definitely think that's a challenge, right?
The Mali example, for example.
On the Mali example, which we talked about before, where you have kind of a political force majeure situation and where the mission is actually leaving the country, that is a challenge. I guess that MIGA is part of the solution there, but as I understand it, they insure mainly the physical plant, and they don't cover anything outside of that. So even in that situation, that would not have helped us. So I think there is a challenge there in the UN setup and the structure in regards to long-term commitments, because they are in the countries on a mandate. So from what I hear from Mats and Kube, I mean, it's outside the UN compound, and they have taken the risk on, if UN chooses to leave, they have to find another off-taker for the electricity. And that is, of course, an option, but again, it is also a relatively high risk, right? So in that case, it's challenging. I think on EPC side, if you do EPC projects, it's a different kind of risk. It's mutually shared between the two parties, and they become the owners of the equipment and can actually relocate that to another mission or choose to use it somewhere else.
Yeah, I think Marcus wants to comment on that. Marcus from MIGA. So he'll just find a microphone so you can hear him too.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, thanks very much. And Anders, thanks for that. I mean, just to be clear on the MIGA side, we do cover the physical plant. That's true. For sort of politically motivated damage that, you know, could occur to a project. But we're also covering, you know, expropriation risk, which is, say, you know, either the government or the state or a local authority does something to interfere with the project, you know, being able to operate. And also transfer restriction, the ability to get money out of the country. And if, in fact, and in fact, as Mads, I think, mentioned, one of the great advantages that these projects, this program has with the UN, is that that's actually not a concern, because the UN is paying in dollars offshore. So, you know, for many investors doing power projects in a developing country, you have to worry about receiving local currency and then going to the central bank, getting it, you know, getting access to hard currency and getting it out of the country. But that's not an issue here. So there are, and actually those other risks are, in fact, not only are they the more prominent risks, I think, for most investors, and particularly if you're selling to a utility. To a state-owned utility, and you've got a power purchase agreement with them. That's a major concern in developing countries. But I think also from an investor point of view, if you actually look at, you know, when you're talking about Central African Republic or Somalia or Mali, you know, I think intuitively you think that the biggest risk to the investment is We started off this morning hearing about having to clear landmines from from the land site, and you think about physical problems, but I don't think actually that's the case. That if you look at the percentages of what are you really exposed to, what is that investment amount really exposed to the risks, a much bigger factor is the risk that suddenly somebody's going to come in, and it may be more explicit, like we're changing your tax regime. It may be completely unexplicit. Somebody comes along and says, we need a bribe to allow you to continue to operate. And anyway, those are the things that MEGA and the World Bank are trying to basically take off the table for investors.
And can I just add to that? I think in terms of our assessment of risks to this project at the outset, the risks that Marcus was talking about, I think were perhaps the key concerns that we had, where in Somalia, to take that example, there's this somewhat undefined relationship between the state governments in Somalia and the federal government, and where we, to a large extent as possible, have tried to secure our sort of legal footprint in the country, but where the laws are continuously being written, and I think where we are, in many sense, a bit vulnerable to, now that we have the investment in place, to being pressured by the government, and where I think the sort of mitigating against the risk of the government then to have some undue interference with that plant, I think has been really key. And I think where we really see the value of MEGA has also been around being able to provide guarantees at quite an affordable rate. Because I think for a project like the one in Baidoa, being able to maintain a sort of a competitive price for our electricity is key to making that plant a success, and where if it hadn't been for MEGA, I am not sure what extent we would be able to go forward with other types of mechanisms to mitigate against the risk of government interference.
Perfect, thank you very much. In the interest of time, I think we should soon get to a conclusion. I'm just thinking, there are a lot of us here that are representing trade promotion or member states' governments. What support would you be looking for from us when you go to try to approach the UN, either in the field directly or here at headquarters? What can we do to make your life easier? What would your recommendations be for us? And you get a short time each, and it's short but sweet. Anders, you start.
I think a lot of these kind of seminars are quite important, and so keep doing that. Overall, it's difficult to say what can attract more vendors. Perhaps more direct case studies, because access to the UNGM platform is that's not the challenge, right? You can go in and you can register, but what does an actual public procurement opportunity look like? Just to give a few examples there, timelines, quite important. It could be for any kind of commodity, but just to give some more concrete examples, and then perhaps an analysis of what are the UN buying. So what are the companies that you should be reaching out to in the respective countries, and to gain their interest, because all of this information is publicly available since the UN is a public organization. So you can see exactly, I think we even saw it at the slides earlier, what is spent on what, which sector. So I think that should be more focused. That would be the advice from here.
Thanks. Mats?
I think that continued pressure on the UN and oversight over implementation, in the sense that the UN has set quite ambitious targets for greening its operation, and I think for member states to play a close eye on how that is being implemented and making sure the UN reaches those targets. And I do believe providing a little bit of flexibility to the UN for exploring various models of reaching those targets I mean, we believe that we offer an innovative service, and we believe that that model is, it's very well suited to both transition the UN, but also leave a sort of a lasting legacy in the areas where they've been operating. But I think there are other models as well, and giving the UN the space as sort of the financing countries to the UN operation, giving the UN space to explore new models, I think is key. Yeah.
Thank you. And Thomas, what will you be looking for from us?
Yeah, maybe just to keep it short and sweet, if kind of it's about bridging the supply and demand, and kind of because it's really difficult. Like if I would know personally what to do, I would kind of ask for it. The point is that kind of it's the unknown.
Great. Thank you very much, all of you. I don't want to venture into summarizing this discussion, but I think you've all come with very important lessons for us, both for us as actors here, as member states representatives, but also for us in the field. How can we support you there? What can we do? You talked about the bottom-up approach in a certain sense, or the outside-in approach maybe when it comes to procurement. And the importance, as always, of understanding your market, understanding your situation in the ecosystem. And I think that's something that you as private sector always do. So thank you very much for this. I don't know if you want to say any last words, or if we're just, yes, you do. I see that someone wants to say some last words. I think the console.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the moderator for taking us through. I'm sorry for being a little bit late to lunch, but there's a huge amount of sandwiches there, so at least, and that's well deserved to all of you. On behalf of the organizers, let me thank you all for participating in this. I'm looking forward to continuing the dialogue. This is a first attempt to sort of bring some of these parties together, and I think this event has really demonstrated the need for all of us to work more closely together, because we all have a share in this. I think, I'm hoping at least through this event that we've also demonstrated that there is business opportunities in these areas. Of course, needless to say, it is difficult markets, so it requires a lot of stamina from you to get engaged in this. But like I said, with the 400-meter hurdle runners, all hurdles are possible to jump over, and I'm quite sure that at the end of the day, we collectively will be able to jump over all the hurdles that we have in front of us, because we need to deliver on this. We have all committed to deliver SDG 7, which is the sustainable energy goal, by 2030, and that applies to all. And we still have about 700 million that are unserved, and they are, of course, in most of these countries that we have been discussing today. That's also where we have the highest number of unserved people. So we really need to roll up our sleeves and get our act together and start working in order to meet the targets that we have set. So, again, thank you very much to all of you, and thanks to the Consulate General of Norway that has hosted us, and I think this has been extremely useful. I'm hoping then that now you will have bilateral meetings, maybe one-on-one meetings between the UN and companies, and I'm looking forward to hear what kind of outcome you will get through those meetings. So, thank you. Enjoy the lunch.